13 Democrats just walked across the aisle and voted for voter-id legislation. And they did it while Hakeem Jeffries was still standing at the podium calling the whole thing voter suppression. Sit with that for a moment. Not after he left the room. Not on a different day. While he was still speaking. 13 members of his own caucus looked at their leader, looked at their constituents, and chose their constituents. And that is not even the most consequential thing that happened in the same 7-day window, because the week that produced those 13 votes also produced a Democratic governor confirming at a press conference what her party spent years calling a right-wing fantasy, a software company publicly contradicting that governor's explanation of her own scandal, and the most famous Democratic strategist in America going on his own podcast to tell his party the fight is over. I'm Susan Kokinda with Susan Report News, and I've been watching the machinery of party discipline for a long time. Here's what I am covering today. First, what the SAVE Act actually does, and why the argument against it has never survived contact with the voters it claims to protect. Second, the 3 votes that turned one Democratic defector into 13 in 5 months, and what the legislative architecture behind them tells you about how this fight is actually being waged. Third, the New Jersey scandal that arrived 24 hours before those votes, what the governor said, what the software company said in response, and why the gap between those 2 accounts is the story. And fourth, the Senate math, the 4 Republican holdouts, and the one name that makes the difference between this bill dying in committee and reaching the president's desk. Let's start with the bill itself. Part 1. What the bill actually does. The Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act requires 2 things. When you register to vote in a federal election, you show documentary proof of United States citizenship, a passport, a birth certificate, a naturalization document. And when you cast your ballot, you show a photo id. That is the complete legislation. 2 requirements, one at registration, one at the polls. You need a photo id to board a commercial flight. You need one to open a bank account, to buy certain medications over the counter, to pick up a package at a post office, to apply for federal assistance. The question the bill's supporters have asked, consistently and without a satisfying answer from the other side, is why the act of voting in a federal election should be the one thing in American civic life that requires less verification than any of those transactions. The response from Democratic leadership has not been an answer to that question. It has been a reframing of it. Chuck Schumer called the bill Jim Crow 2.0. Hakeem Jeffries stood at that podium and said, "It is not about voter identification, it is about voter suppression." Voter suppression. For the same card you show to buy cold medicine. Here's the problem with that argument. It is not an argument about the bill. It is an argument about the people who support the bill. And those people, as of the most recent available polling, constitute 82% of the American electorate. A McLaughlin and Associates survey of 1,000 likely general election voters found 82% in agreement that only United States citizens should be allowed to vote in United States elections. A separate Fox News poll found more than 80% support for requiring a photo id to register. These are not Republican numbers. In Washington, they call an 80-20 issue a governing consensus. This may be an 85-15 issue, and it goes deeper than national averages. Pew Research polling from 2025 showed more than 7 in 10 Democratic voters support showing a government-issued photo id to cast a ballot. The number among Black voters is 76%. The communities that Democratic leadership has spent a decade claiming would be disenfranchised by this bill support it by a 3-to-1 margin. There is a story about a Democratic congressman from Alabama, Shamar Figures, who took his party's talking points into a town hall with his own constituents and asked how many of them did not have a government-issued id. Not one hand went up. He walked into that room with an argument. His voters took it apart without saying a word. This is the wall Jeffries has been defending. Not against public opposition, against public consensus. Part 2. 1 defector, then 6, then 13. To understand what happened in the 3rd week of July 2026, you need to understand the 3 votes that preceded it, because the progression is not random, and it is not accidental. In April of 2025, the House passed the original SAVE Act. 4 Democrats crossed the aisle. Ed Case of Hawaii, Henry Cuellar of Texas, Jared Golden of Maine, and Marie Gluesenkamp Perez of Washington. 4. The Senate never brought it to the floor. In February of 2026, the House passed an updated and expanded version, the Save America Act. This time, only one Democrat voted yes, Henry Cuellar alone. The bill passed 218 to 213. Jeffries had tightened his grip. The defection rate moved from 4 to 1. Party discipline, by the conventional measure, had improved. Remember that number, 1. Because what happened next was not a collapse of discipline. It was a deliberate legislative strategy designed to make discipline impossible to maintain. Speaker Mike Johnson did not bring the voter-id bill back as a standalone measure for Democrats to safely vote down for the 4th time. He attached it to things that Democratic members in competitive districts cannot afford to be seen opposing. On July 22nd, the House voted on the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2027, a $1.15 trillion package that included pay raises of 5 to 7% for American service members. The Save America Act wrote inside it. The bill passed 216 to 212. 6 Democrats voted yes. Think about the political geometry of that vote. A member representing a swing district, with a significant veteran or military-adjacent constituency, facing a November election, had to decide, do I vote against pay raises for the troops in order to stop citizenship verification for voters? 6 members looked at that calculation and chose differently than Jeffries needed them to. Cuellar and Gonzalez from South Texas border districts, Golden from rural Maine, Gray from California, Gluesenkamp-Perez from Washington, Davis from a competitive district in North Carolina. Every one of them represents a district where elections are decided by persuadable voters, not by party-based turnout. Johnson moved again the same day. The House voted 232 to 198 on the Stop Insider Trading Act, a bill prohibiting members of Congress from trading individual stocks, one of the most consistently popular ideas in American politics, regardless of party, because it applies to the people making the rules. Republicans attached a federal voter-id requirement directly to it. The new question for every Democratic member was, do you vote against banning congressional insider trading in order to stop voter-id? 13 Democrats voted yes, the largest single group of Democratic supporters for this legislation since Republicans began advancing SAVE Act proposals through Congress. 1 in February, 6 on the defense bill, 13 on the insider trading bill. That is not a wall cracking. That is a wall under sustained and deliberate engineering pressure. And the people doing the engineering understand something about the political physics of a 60-vote Senate that the daily coverage has consistently missed. You do not need the Senate to pass a bill through the Senate. You need the Senate to confirm that the political cost of blocking it has become unbearable. The House votes are building that confirmation, one defection at a time. Part 3. What the governor admitted and what she did not. The 13 House votes on July 22nd did not arrive in a vacuum. 24 hours earlier, something happened at a press conference in Trenton, New Jersey, that changed the political atmosphere in which every one of those members cast their ballot. New Jersey's Democratic governor, Mikey Sherrill, stood in front of cameras and made an announcement. Approximately 6,600 non-citizens had been registered to vote in her state. The registrations occurred through a software error in New Jersey's motor vehicle system, she said, running from June 2023 to June 2024. A preliminary state review found that roughly 400 of those individuals cast ballots. For years, the proposition that non-citizens could be registered through a state system and vote in American elections was treated, in mainstream political coverage, as a conspiratorial claim. Not a policy dispute, not a legitimate concern, a fantasy that responsible people did not entertain. A sitting Democratic governor had just confirmed it at a public podium. That is the headline. Here is what the headline missed. Sherrill pointed the finger at the technology vendor, a company called IDEMIA. The argument was software failure. The system registered people it should not have registered because of a technical error that was not the state's fault. That framing contains the damage. If it is the software company's error, the story is a correctable technical failure, not a systemic breakdown of election administration. IDEMIA did not accept that framing. The company's senior vice president, Lisa Shoemaker, publicly challenged the governor's characterization. According to IDEMIA, All 6,600 applicants answered no when asked whether they were United States citizens. The system recorded those answers correctly. The citizenship data, the company said, remained available to the New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission and was transmitted to the state's Division of Elections. These two accounts cannot both be true. Either the software failed and registered people despite their non-citizen status, which is what the governor said, or the software recorded the correct answers, transmitted them to the relevant state agencies, and those agencies registered people anyway, which is what the software company said. Every version of this story is an argument for the SAVE Act. Pick the version where the software failed. The bill's documentary proof requirement at registration would have caught it. Pick the version where the state received accurate citizenship data and registered people anyway. The bill's requirement would have caught it. Pick the version where nobody failed and the system just lost track. The bill would have caught it. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division opened an inquiry. The White House noted, correctly, that Democratic officials and their media allies had repeatedly described non-citizen registration as impossible, and that this had, once again, been proven wrong. Washington noticed. And that is why 13 members noticed too. Part 4. The strategist who waved the white flag. July 23rd, one day after the House votes. The third thing happened, and this one came from inside the party. James Carville went on his podcast, Politics War Room, with his co-host Al Hunt. Carville is not a fringe figure. He ran the war room that put Bill Clinton in the White House in 1992. He has read American political data accurately for 4 decades. When Carville speaks about what a poll means for a party, Democratic professionals listen, not because they always agree, but because he has been right often enough to earn the hearing. He still insisted that actual voter fraud in the United States is an infinitesimal problem. That is his position, and he held it. But then he said what his party did not want said on tape. He told Democrats flatly they are not going to win the war against voter ID. He said the polling is devastating. He said the fight makes his party look, in his own words, like they don't want to check the eligibility of a voter. He urged Democratic leadership to accept the requirement and redirect their energy to fights they can win. That sentence, it comes across that Democrats don't want to check the eligibility of a voter, is the sentence Jeffries cannot answer. Not because it is unfair, because it is accurate. The party has voted against checking voter eligibility every time it has come to a floor vote. The perception Carville described is not a messaging problem. It is a voting record. Carville did not wake up one morning favoring Republican election legislation. He looked at numbers that told him his party is attached to an anchor, and he said so publicly. When the most famous Democratic strategist alive tells his party on tape that a fight is unwinnable, that tape becomes part of the record. And the record is what the next 13 defectors will be reading. Part 5. The Senate, the 4, and the one that matters. Here is the mathematics of the Senate as it currently stands. Republicans hold 53 seats. Democrats hold 47. To defeat a filibuster and move a normal bill to a final vote, you need 60 votes. Not one Democratic senator has indicated any willingness to provide one. So the path to 60 does not exist through persuasion. Republicans have 2 options. Find a procedural vehicle that needs only a simple majority, budget reconciliation is the primary one, or change the filibuster rules themselves, which requires a simple majority vote but leaves a permanent procedural consequence that both parties have reasons to avoid. The reconciliation path has already been attempted. Senator Lindsey Graham brought an amendment to attach the Save America Act to a $70 billion budget reconciliation package. It failed. Not because of Democratic opposition. Reconciliation is immune to the filibuster. It failed because 4 Republicans voted against it. Susan Collins, Tom Tillis, Lisa Murkowski, Mitch McConnell. 53 minus 4 is 49. 49 is not a majority. The bill died on the Republican side of the aisle. Tillis is leaving the Senate. He has said the bill is dead unless it reaches 60 votes and that passing it before the midterms would cause chaos. McConnell has opposed using reconciliation for this purpose on procedural grounds. Neither vote is recoverable in the near term. That leaves Collins and Murkowski. Murkowski's objection is the most substantive. She supports the principle. She has said explicitly that only citizens should vote. Her concern is implementation for rural Alaska communities, where 20% of the population has no road connection to the state system, and where complying with a documentary proof requirement could mean boarding a plane to deliver a birth certificate. That is a real logistical problem in a state with genuinely unusual geography. It deserves a real answer, not a procedural dismissal. Collins is the different case. Collins has already said, in a public written statement, that she supports the version of the Save America Act that passed the House. She said the law is clear that only American citizens are eligible to vote in federal elections. Senator Mike Lee announced that she had become the 50th Republican supporter of the legislation. 50. Her objection has not been to the bill. It has been to the process, specifically to using reconciliation for legislation she believes should travel through regular order. That is a procedural objection, not a substantive one. Procedural objections are negotiable in a way that substantive objections are not. The negotiation is not simple. Collins has real reasons for her position and real constituents who are watching how she handles it. But the distance between where she is and where the bill needs her is a procedural distance, not a policy one. 50 votes on a reconciliation measure means the Vice President of the United States walks into the chamber and breaks the tie. That is the math. Collins is already at 50. The question is whether the process surrounding the bill can be structured in a way that gives her what she needs to hold that vote when it counts. Part 6. The pattern and where it ends. Here's the thing the mainstream coverage keeps missing. In American political history, genuine 80-20 issues do not stay unresolved permanently. They can be delayed. They can be procedurally blocked. They can be demagogued through election cycles. But eventually, the arithmetic of Democratic representation catches up with the holdouts. And it catches up in a pattern that has repeated enough times to be recognized before it completes. Swing district members defect first. A party elder then publicly declares the fight unwinnable. Leadership is then dragged, visibly and reluctantly, toward accepting what its own voters already want. Welfare reform in 1996. Democratic members spent years calling work requirements cruel and extreme. Bill Clinton signed the bill. Within a few years, members of his own party were taking credit for it. The same sequence on crime legislation. The same sequence on border enforcement rhetoric. The pattern is consistent enough that knowing where a political fight is in the sequence tells you more about where it is going than any single week's floor votes. Look at where this fight sits today. Swing district defectors, 13 on the record in July, up from 1 in February. Party elder declaring the war unwinnable. Carville on tape this month. What is missing is the last stage, the one where the leadership that has been blocking the bill accepts the inevitable and the legislation passes. Jeffries is not at that stage. Not yet. The wall is not gone. But 13 is not 1. And 1 became 6, and 6 became 13 inside of 5 months, while the polling held at 82-15, and a Democratic governor stood at a podium and confirmed the underlying problem her party had spent a decade denying. The direction of travel is not ambiguous. The speed is the question, not the destination. The Senate comes back in September. The reconciliation question is not settled. The Collins negotiation is not resolved. The November calendar does not stop moving. And the 13 members who voted against their leader in July are going to spend the August recess in their districts talking to the same voters who told congressman figures they all have ids. Is Hakeem Jeffries losing control of his party? He still controls the caucus. He still sets the floor schedule. He still delivers the message. But he no longer controls the math. And in a legislature, the math is what actually governs. That is the fight that is actually happening, not the one the daily coverage is tracking. I'm Susan Kokinda with Susan Report News. If you want to follow this through September when the reconciliation vote comes back around, subscribe and turn on notifications. And leave a comment. Is 13 the peak, or is there a 25 vote coming? I read every one of them. The next video covers what happened inside the Senate the night of the vote-a-rama, and why the outcome was not what either side had planned.